What is going on, Babylonians? That's right, it's me, Songs of Rage, back with another Outriders video to bring to you, and today it's become mainly a topic of discussion going around the community at the moment as to how some of the tier 3 mods could actually be brought up to speed to match those of Fortress, Moaning Winds, all those kind of side of things, and obviously the talks of nerfs to how Fortress is being affected and all that. We want to be able to give our opinion as to how we go about it, how we can find a way to be able to make everything viable in this game. Now, obviously, that would be an impossible task. Obviously, there are going to be some things that are always going to be better. There are going to be some things that are going to be worse. So, our task here is to be able to give you as much viability, or give our thoughts as to what would make me run this mod, what would make us genuinely choose this over anything else that's currently meta. So that would be Moaning Winds, Fortress, Dark Sacrifice, Killing Spree, all those kind of things. What those little used tier 3 mods, what can we do to be able to make them better and make them more worthwhile? And I think we've actually got some really good suggestions, and I really hope that maybe this actually gets to PCF, maybe it can get to Square Enix, maybe we can actually influence some of the ways that these could actually get buffed in the near future. And if some of these actually did come into play, it would really shake up some builds, and I do genuinely think it would make the game a lot more fun in the current climate. So without further ado, let's get into it, because we have a lot of mods to be able to cover, and we've got a lot of discussion, so let's go started. Just one last thing before we do get straight into it, and that's the fact that only 29.2% of you are currently subscribed, watching our videos and watching our channel. It would really mean the world to us if you were able to hit a like and drop that subscribe button for ourselves, just to let us know that you really do enjoy the content that we're making. And if you want to keep up to date with anything that's going on with Outriders, whether it be content or whether it be dev news that comes out every single Thursday, we are the best place to be for that. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and be in the loop with all that. Alright, so let's get started. So let's start from top left all the way down to the end of the list and work our way from left to right. So first up, we've got Life and Death, where killing shots currently create a blast that restores 33% of max health to players, and this triggers every single 3 seconds. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't used this mod ever since I've done any of the weapon testing for the legendary guides that we did, and even though on paper it's a really fun mod to be able to use, and it does offer you a lot of survivability, the problem is that currently with the time trial things, and this is going to be probably a recurring theme for most of the mods that are on here, is the fact that it doesn't offer you anything offensive wise. So what I would potentially do to be able to mix this up is, because we've currently got some kind of mod combination in the game that actually rewards you for weapon damage for the more you actually got health regen, I'd love to see Life and Death actually get like a change as to how it works, and maybe give it so that you actually get like a flat amount of health, but then it gives you for 3 seconds, it gives you like maybe like a 5% or a 10% health regen boost, and that allows you to then feed into the tier 2 mod, which is the cycle, and that actually gives a really nice pairing between weapon and armor mods, and it would also help you out offensively. Now obviously it does require another mod, but that's, you know, you get to choose that. Do you want to be able to go for a little bit more offensive just from using the gun, or do you actually just like the pure survivability and just having that extra health? Maybe an increase to the radius would be nice, but I think the 3 seconds would be absolutely fine if it did go for the extra health regen. And that can apply to either just yourself or to all players. Personally, I think it will be alright with just yourself if you're able to still have that blast that can heal people that are still nearby. So that's potentially how I would change it, and I'd love to see that. And I think that may even get even better on my Technomancer, even though I wouldn't be able to use it for the blast radius, obviously, of the standard healing. I could use it as long range support to be able to support like Devastators, Tricksters, even Pyromancers that obviously get up close, and then I can benefit from the health regen for the fact that I do run the cycle in my build, and it will give me an extra damage multiplier on top of that. So up next, we've got Ultimate Bone Shrapnel, and this most of the time is considered a worse version than the tier 2 mod of the exact same name, or of Bone Shrapnel, just purely for the fact that Bone Shrapnel triggers on killing shots and has a much lower cooldown, whereas Ultimate Bone Shrapnel triggers on critical shots and has a 3-second cooldown, which is really kind of on the long side if you start factoring in this is more of a firepower kind of base build. What I would like to see for this is actually get primarily used for anomaly power or firepower devastators. And the reason why I think that is because this could be an effective way to be able to spread bleed, and for seismic builds especially, that could be a really nice way. Most of the time I see builds actually run inflicting bleed on your earthquake, where you don't have to actually use that. If the cooldown on this was much lower and was actually more in line with things like Winter's Blast, which we'll get to in a little bit, it would actually be a really nice tech option to actually give you a reason to be able to shoot your guns rather than actually just relying purely on your skills. So what I would like to see at the very least for Ultimate Bone Shrapnel is just change that from 3 seconds down to 1 second, and I think that would actually make it a potential choice and a potential pick for Devastators especially, and maybe a couple of Tricksters if they're looking to be able to run some kind of bleed firepower builds to be able to use Vampiric Mag and all that. So I think that's the main way to go. It doesn't necessarily make it viable for all classes, but I think a slight change like that doesn't make it overpowered, but it does actually give it some kind of viable use for classes and their builds. Now I'm going to basically, well, obviously we'll get to them in their order, but I'm going to basically build, just give you an idea as to how I would boost ultimate bullets, or those kind of tier 3 mods. So in this case we've got ultimate vulnerability bullets, where shots inflict vulnerable on enemies, and this refreshes every single second. Now there are 2 ways that we could go about this, or maybe even both at the same time, where I think we could either cut down the cooldown from 1 second to 0.5, and the reason why we have that in the game is we currently have it for Body Snatcher, so why can't we have it for other guns? So I'd like to think that would be useful. I don't think that's abusable whatsoever. I think that actually gives it more of a chance to be able to refresh itself on guns, because it does seem with some of the guns that fire so quickly, to have to wait every single second for that to refresh, it's just not really viable. On top of that, I'd like to see like an added multiplier, or some kind of modifier to the perk itself, where it vulnerable inflicted this way is like 25% or 50% more potent. Vulnerable at the moment only gives you a 15% damage multiplier on top of enemies that are obviously inflicted with it, so to have it get an extra 50% on top of that is just going to pump it up to 22.5%. It's not massive, it's not much, and even if we went for 100%, obviously that would bring it up to 30. I don't think it would be broken. I think it will be a nice little tech option, and it gives you more of a reason to actually use those kind of like status kind of guns that actually really at the moment just don't really have like an option as to why you would run them, unless you're going for some kind of seismic build and you're trying to find a reliable way to inflict bleed, or just using Vampiric Mags or anything like that. If you're not using freeze or toxic in your Technomancer build for whatever reason, then you can put those on your guns and it can actually reliably inflict those statuses ready for things like toxic lead, or obviously to trigger your damage multipliers. So I'd like to see it get some kind of buff in that kind of way, where they just get more potent, and it's specific to the weapon because you're firing it from that. I don't know how difficult that would be to be able to program, but I would like to see it actually get implemented. Winter Blast recently got a buff a few weeks back, and is actually kind of balanced. I do actually like how it works at the moment. 1 second cooldown is very nice, doesn't do any damage, inflicts freeze in an AoE just on a critical shot, and it has a decent radius as well at 5 meters. So I do actually think that this was brought up in line with most of the other mods. I do think it's a nice tech option. It's not going to be always used on every single gun, but it is a lot of fun to be able to mess around with. So actually I would stick with Winter's Blast and just keep that as it is, at least for the time being. But obviously if other things start getting changed, then that's something we would have to revisit. After that we've got Embalmer's Rage, and I like what they were doing with Embalmer's Rage. Embalmer's Rage was actually like one of the main perks to be able to go for back at the early days of this game, and that's because if for 5 seconds after getting a killing shot, all follow-up shots will be critical shots, and then this refreshes every 4 seconds. Now the main problem you've got with this is the fact that not many guns in this game actually have a really high crit multiplier, which means that if you were to ever use like a firepower build and you're always going to go for Killing Spree or Dark Sacrifice, you're going to have a better time with those than you are going to be using Embalmer's Rage, because most of the guns have anywhere between 104% to 164%, I think is the main ones. And then obviously if you start looking into rifles, that's when it starts pushing over 175%. Now obviously if it's 175% and upwards, you're getting more of a bonus from that gun than you are from using Dark Sacrifice and Killing Spree, because technically the two of them together would be 100, well, either Dark Sacrifice or Killing Spree at its most would be 175%. Technically that's how the numbers kind of work. And obviously then if that's not factoring any crits, so if you manually get a crit on top of that, you're dealing even more damage. So Embalmer's Rage most of the time isn't necessarily worth it. Now, by itself, it's a really good mod, and I do think that it is viable. I just don't think it's as viable as the other firepower ones. So maybe we could use something to be able to increase how long it actually is applicable for. Maybe we could use it so maybe you get like an extra 10% crit damage while it's active or something like that. Just like a little modifier on top of it just to make it feel a bit more viable. Now, this might just purely be from me playing as a PC player, because obviously I have heard quite a few comments around in the community about how PC players are able to hit crits a lot more reliably, a lot more effectively than console players. So maybe this is a console mod and maybe we don't need to touch it. But from my stance as a PC player, I'd like to see some kind of added multiplier so I can actually choose this specifically over that of Dark Sacrifice and Killing Spree. Ultimate Damage Link is actually a really nice mod. It's one of my favourites. The only problem is that obviously, as playing as mainly as a Technomancer, it already has that built into Blighted Rounds. So to some degree it has that in there. So why would I necessarily use this over things that can increase my damage in the first place? You wouldn't. So, but I do know that classes like Firepower Devastators or maybe even a Firepower Trickster actually do benefit from this quite nicely, because most of the increase in damage are already close range guns, so they can actually get away with putting the Ultimate Damage Link on it. I would personally love to see maybe a test where we can get away with using Ultimate Damage Link without a cooldown, so it's always active, it's always on. That way it's kind of like a mini or a pseudo Blighted Rounds, and obviously having that splash damage. So maybe, or even just reducing its cooldown to 0.5. I do think 1 second to be able to just inflict 40% of your weapon damage that you've inflicted that round, just it's not enough. It's not by itself. It's just it definitely needs a little bit more to it than that. So the fact that we can then increase it by its cooldown or decrease it by 50% would be a nice place to start. And I'd like to say I'd love to test that out for them, just to see which one, if it's overpowered for the fact that it doesn't have any kind of cooldown, or if it just needs like a lesser cooldown. So that's what I'd say. I think the damage numbers are actually kind of alright on that. So those don't need kind of changing at all. As for Bombs Ahead, I don't think I've ever seen anyone use this mod, and it's a massive shame, because every single tier 3 mod should be a reason to use it. Killing shots turn enemies into anomaly bomb, dealing 200k damage. Now the problem is this doesn't give me, I haven't tested this out myself, and it doesn't give us any kind of like radius figures. So purely the only thing I can think of is they just kind of deal something kind of close by to if they were ever stacked up on top of each other. And the fact that this refreshes once every 1 second, okay, that's good, but it needs something to be able to differentiate it, because personally it sounds on paper worse than the tier 2 of Bone Shrapnel, or at least that's what it's trying to become. So I don't see why you would ever want this. This definitely needs something to be able to make it unique. And maybe you could put like a timer or a delay on the explosion, make them a bigger bomb, make it almost kind of like a double the damage or something like that, something to separate it, to make the body actually into a bomb. This one's probably had the least amount of thought on my side, because I just can't find a way without changing the whole thing altogether to be able to make it unique. So Bombs Ahead definitely needs some kind of rework, and it definitely needs a lot more time spent on it. As we move on to Golem Rising, I genuinely think that this actually is a good mod by itself. And the reason why I think that is going to be purely dependent on if PCF or Square Enix are actually going to follow through what they're saying or what they're hinting at the endgame kind of scenario is going to be. Currently it's not usable due to the fact that we don't need any survivability mods on our guns, let alone in most of our armor slots. So why would we need this kind of mod by itself? But if they are going to change it from more of a time trial thing to maybe more of a survivability kind of side of things, or actually how long can you last, etc, etc, and we need a bit more defense, this could be the go-to mod. And I like how it currently works. I like the duration, I like the cooldown, and I like the effect it gives, of the fact it gives you a 65% damage reduction. So I wouldn't touch this one. I think if that's purely depends on if they follow through, but I think that this actually could be balanced and will actually be picked up by a few people as we go through into the next endgame kind of scenario. As for Dark Sacrifice, this is the be-all and end-all as when it comes to firepower, at least for Technomancers anyway, because obviously how quickly they can heal. Most of the time it's just Killing Spree, but they're basically brother and sister between the two of them. It's just, do you want to have that max weapon damage bonus up all the time and obviously lose a bit of health, or do you actually want to ramp yourself up, but obviously keep yourself healthy? So Dark Sacrifice is obviously in top 3 kind of potential for best mod that currently exists, so this does not need touching whatsoever. Do not nerf this, do not change it from anything that it currently already does. It's perfectly balanced and everything else should be aspiring to this. Going from there, we go into Ultimate Ashen Bullets, and this is very similar to the Vulnerable. So what I would like to see from this is that we get some kind of modifier to the Ash. So maybe we get extra damage to enemies that are inflicted with Ash. I know there are some armor mods that already apply that, or maybe we can get something like plus 20% duration on enemies that are inflicted with Ash, for example. I'm not saying that's exactly what it should be, but it definitely needs another line of text in there to say, you know, to give it some kind of uniqueness, to be able to have a reason to be able to run this mod, rather than it just being some kind of utility. So whether it's increased duration or whether it's increased damage, I think that would be the best way to go about this, and I would actually love to see that for most of the ultimate kind of bullets that are going to be fun. And following quickly on from that, obviously we've got Ultimate Bleed bullets. This bleed is obviously a status that inflicts damage, so I'd like to see that it has like a plus 50% or plus 25%. Obviously I'm pulling some of these numbers out of my head, but I'd like to see some, like, for example, plus multiplier here to say bleed does X amount damage more. Obviously we could start at maybe 25%, because I do know that Devastators actually can stack up bleeds quite nastily, and obviously you can bleed enemies dry, obviously if it's done right. So maybe something along those lines. I don't think a bottom tree Devastator could actually die if they had this, and obviously have the node where they heal for however much bleed damage is being inflicted. But it would make it more viable. It would make it more useful to see. Devastators might start moving away from Fortress, even if Fortress was to stay as it currently was, or they might start using the Bulwark and move away from Moaning Winds. So it gives them that opportunity, it gives them that choice, it gives them that chance to be able to try something a little bit different. I genuinely feel like something along those lines, even if it's increased duration, would actually help it out with the multiplier. And that same goes for Ultimate Burning Bullets. I'd like to see another multiplier on that, say increase burn duration by X amount, or increase burn damage by X amount, so it could be anywhere between like 25 to 50%. That would be the easiest way, in my opinion, to be able to help inflict that, and that goes for the same for Ultimate Freezing Bullets, and it also goes the same for Ultimate Toxic Bullets, just to be able to increase duration or to be able to increase damage respectively. And obviously Ultimate Weakening Bullets, where shots inflict weakness. I'd like to see some similar to the Vulnerable. I'd like to see where it gets another modifier to say obviously weakness is amplified by 50% or something like that. Obviously this doesn't get used at the moment just because it doesn't give you any kind of like offensive capabilities. It just weakens the enemies that are being hit by it. So it would be nice to, obviously if the end game does change, and obviously weakness along with defensive mods actually make it a little bit more prevalent in the meta, this would be nice, and I do think it would potentially be picked up if it did more than just inflict it. Up next we have Ultimate Anomaly Surge, and if I was to compare this against Ultimate Bone Shrapnel, it just feels like a worse version, because it requires you to hit more critical shots, it does less damage, obviously it refreshes a little bit quicker, and it definitely has a smaller radius, so it's just like, well, why do you exist? It has no uniqueness to it. It's basically Bone Shrapnel if it was quicker but didn't deal bleed, and obviously in a smaller radius. So this one needs some kind of rework similar to Bombs Ahead. It just needs changing altogether. I don't feel like we need any more that when critical shots are hit, it needs to be able to deal so much damage in so much radius. It's just not viable. So no one's going to be going for that. If they're going for critical shots, they're either trying to raise up their crit stack, they're trying to, critical shots do not consume ammo, or they're just looking to be able to deal their extra damage that's on top of their weapon damage for Dark Sacrifice and Killing Spree. Ultimate Anomaly Surge needs something unique to it, and it needs to bring something. And personally, I can't think of anything just yet, so I'm open to ideas. If you've got any ideas in the comment section as to how we can make this unique or be able to buff this up to the same degree as the others, then drop that message down in the comment section. I'll have a read through that as well. Next up on the list is Legendary Minefield, and I personally have a soft spot for this mod because it is a lot of fun to be able to watch, it is a lot of fun to be able to trigger, and I had so much fun using this in the story mode after I got my Landlubber. So I personally would love to see this, become almost like an explosive demolitions build. Obviously I've done one for the Technomancer, but it would be so much more fun if I was able to trigger something off my guns. So I would like to see the cooldown reduced on this massively. I would like to see it go down to 1 second instead of 3 seconds, and maybe get a buff to the damage that it does, because 64k is not much. Now I understand it has AoE, and I understand it deploys about 4 explosives every single time you get a critical shot, so technically we're not talking 64k, we're actually talking more along the lines of 250k, but the fact that each individual explosion is not really going to hit every single time, it's not like you're going to hit one target unless it's an elite and you're consistently dinging them in the dome. You're not going to consistently hit all 4 explosives on the same target, so we can't really base that off that as well. So I would like to see it get bumped to maybe more along the lines of 90 to 100k per explosive, and reduce the cooldown to 1, maybe even 2 seconds if it got that nice damage buff, just so it happens a bit more often, and we can obviously have that visual effect of all those bombs just popping out of the head and just causing so much chaos and destruction. Personally, I'd love to see that. Let me know your thoughts on that as well. And next up we have Kinetic Stomp. I hear that a lot of this actually gets used in the community. Apparently Kinetic Stomp is quite nice to be able to use for consoles or for anomaly builds for 232k damage in a 5 meter radius when you actually hit a shot. Now my main gripe with this was the fact that, and initially anyway, was the fact that this couldn't be used really on every single build. Technomancers would never really have any kind of use whatsoever for this, due to the fact that you're going to be killing things at long range. You don't need something that triggers around yourself, because nothing's ever going to hit unless you're going to hit one of those red barrels and then infamously start killing yourself. But I also appreciate that tricksters and devastators will actually like to use this mod, so therefore it's okay. It's not like it needs to be usable for every single mod. It doesn't need to be used by every single class. So I do think that 4 seconds is a bit long for this kind of thing. So as a cooldown, I'd like to see it maybe get cut in half. I'd like to see maybe test it out at 2 seconds and just see how it goes from there. I do think it has the potential to be like a mini Moaning Winds, but it does require you to shoot. It's not like you can trigger just like running past something and just triggering it on your reload. So it would encourage you to be able to get into the middle of the fight, and I think Devastators would probably appreciate that the most. So Claymore Torrent was recently buffed, or I say recently, it was buffed a few weeks back, where shots damage 4 enemies within a 6 meter radius with anomaly blades, and deals 207k damage on a 4 second cooldown. Now, I like how it visually looks. I also like the amount of damage it has. I'm not a massive fan of the cooldown that it has, because I do feel like 4 seconds is a bit long, but I can also appreciate the fact that it's doing that 207k to 4 enemies, and obviously, so we're actually looking more like 800k in just a mod that gets triggered every single 4 seconds. So it's not bad. It's definitely in a much better position than it was, because I'm pretty sure it was dealing around about 80k initially, which was absolutely pitiful. It was almost like you were tickling them, especially at higher levels. So I think the 207k is okay for the time being. If anything, I would love to be able to say I'd reduce the cooldown a little bit, maybe to 3 seconds, just try it out. But that's just personal preference. I do think Claymore is a lot better as it currently is, and you definitely really can't go wrong with the Damascus offering that it comes on. So I'm happy for that to stay as it currently is. If we were then to move on to Ultimate Stiffening, it's not Ultimate Stiffening Bullets, which is kind of a pet peeve for me, where shots inflict slow on enemies and this triggers every single second. I would like that to go the same way as like the Ultimate Bleed, Ultimate Weakness, all that kind of thing, where slow has like an increased duration. So it's something to be able to offer it, to be able to give it that extra multiplier. And obviously we don't necessarily need to move the cooldown. The 1 second would be fine, but if we were able to increase how long an enemy was inflicted with slow for, or it gave it an extra kind of like multiplier as to how much damage you can inflict to enemies that are slowed, that could also be a way to go. But yeah, just like a plus 25% duration would be something to make you think twice about using that mod. And then lastly for this video, we've got Ultimate Storm Whip, which obviously did get buffed very recently, in the same way that Claymore Torrent got done as well. And this is actually a really nice buff. I like where this currently is. It has a really short cooldown. It works really well on shotguns for the fact that you can just electrocute so many enemies in one single shot. And the 104k damage is quite nice at the moment. I don't think it's overpowered. I don't think it's too strong. I don't think it's too weak either. I think it's kind of got a nice little balance for now. But if we were to start bringing things up to speed for like the example of Moaning Winds, or we were trying to put things in line with that of Dark Sacrifice, it's not quite there. I do think it needs a little bit more, but it's more than enough for where it needs to be able to experiment with, to be able to have a little bit of fun, and just not make it like a trash kind of mod. So I like where it is. It's okay for the time being, and maybe in the near future we might actually see another buff heading its way.